In this chapter, our focus will be on energy, what it is, and how it changes during chemical reactions. And thermodynamics is the branch of chemistry that's concerned with energy changes. Cells are governed by the laws of physics and chemistry, so we have to understand these laws in order to understand how the cells function. Energy can take many different forms. In general, energy is the capacity to do work. We think of energy as existing in two states, kinetic and potential. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. So in the example below, the girl sliding down the slide is actually releasing kinetic energy. The child standing at the top is potential energy. So she has potential to be releasing energy. It's stored energy. So kinetic energy, anything that's actually moving, and potential energy is energy that's stored. The foods that we consume are great examples of potential energy. Energy stored in the bonds of each of these molecules. And then as we digest those molecules, we're able to release energy and store it in the form of ATP. There are many different forms of energy. There's mechanical, heat, sound, electric, light, or radioactivity. Sometimes we'll see transitions of energy from one form to the other. For example, we might see mechanical energy be released as heat, and we might see that stored energy in the food being transferred into mechanical energy. Some organisms can even digest food and cause a release of light, as exhibited by the bioluminescence that we see in the ocean during the nighttime. Heat is the most convenient way of measuring energy. So we measure energy in calories. 1 calorie equals the heat necessary to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree C. And notice that it's a lowercase c for this calorie. An uppercase C implies kilocalorie. So it's a much larger measure than the simple lowercase calorie. In fact, 1,000 calories is 1 kilocalorie, or the calories that we see measured on our food labels. Those are kilocalories, measured with a capital C calorie. Energy flows in the biological world from the sun. Photosynthetic organisms capture the sun's energy and store it in molecules based on carbon. So now we have energy stored as potential energy in the chemical bonds of these carbon-based molecules. And then the cow eats the grass and the energy is transferred into the cow. Some of it will be used to make the cow larger and stronger, but the majority of it will be burned by the cow himself during his lifetime. Now you'll probably recall redox reactions from an earlier chapter this semester. So this should be just a review of oxidation and reduction. Oxidation and reduction reactions are always paired, and thus we call them redox reactions. Oxidation, you'll recall, is when an atom or molecule loses an electron, and reduction is when it gains an electron. I find this to be kind of opposite, but you have to think of reduction in terms of reduction in charge. So in the case below, molecule B is gaining an electron from molecule A. Thus, molecule B has become reduced in charge. Or you can think of it as just being opposite. Reduction is gaining. When a molecule becomes reduced, that is, gains electrons, it is moved to a higher level of energy than the oxidized form. So the bottom line here is carrying electrons means extra energy. In the future chapters, we're going to see a lot of movement of electrons from one molecule to the other. The molecule that has more electrons or has gained electrons is higher energy than that which has lost the electrons. So again, redox reactions are always paired. So one molecule is losing an electron and one molecule is gaining an electron. After all, the electron has to go somewhere. Take a moment here to diagram a quick redox reaction. Just showing one molecule losing an electron, one molecule gaining an electron. Very similar to the diagram below. And hopefully your brain will hold on to that picture, especially if you add some color to key it in. See if you can make your brain learn to be a little bit photographic through these diagramming exercises. So all activities of living organisms, whether it's growing or running or thinking or singing or reading, involves changes in energy. A set of two universal laws that we call the laws of thermodynamics govern all energy changes in the universe, from nuclear reactions to birds flying through the air. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only change from one form to another. So that means the total amount of energy in the universe remains constant. This figure over here on the right shows us that the energy before was all blue. However, after the energy transformation, we can see that it's gray and blue. So it hasn't changed in amount, or let's say represented here, weight. However, it has changed in form. So it could change from potential to kinetic, or it could change from mechanical energy to light or sound energy. During each conversion, some of the energy will be lost as heat. So in this example, blue might represent the stored energy that's left, and gray might represent that that's lost as heat. When we consider a closed system, this first law of thermodynamics holds true. However, a cell is an open system, or us individually, we're open systems. So we may lose heat to the environment around us. That's why we speak of laws of thermodynamics on a universal level. The amount of energy in the whole universe remains constant. However, the amount of energy in your body could change because we are indeed open systems exchanging with the environment around us. The second law of thermodynamics states that disorder is continuously increasing. It doesn't take a lot of energy in order to let our house get messy. Things get left on the table, things get left on the floor, and this level of disorder is continuously increasing. Now, if we didn't put any energy in, this disorder would continue to increase until there was absolute chaos. However, because we can put energy into the system, we can reorder things. So these energy transformations proceed spontaneously to convert matter from a more ordered or less stable form to a less ordered and more stable form. This figure below illustrates this. We have a nice clean bedroom here. Disorder will happen spontaneously. However, in order to reorder the system, we have to add energy to the system, as in you have to clean it up and put things back where they belong. This level of disorder that's continually increasing, we term entropy. So you might say, entropy is increasing in my house. I need to invest some energy in order to. This other figure here shows us that the energy is there before, and then there's going to be an unusable portion of energy that's left after. There's still the same amount of energy overall, so we are obeying the first law of thermodynamics. However, only some of it is actually usable. So when we look in a closed system, the usable energy decreases with each reaction that goes on. In order to reorder and put things back in a usable form, we have to invest energy. A perfect example of this is when we look at degrading our foods. We take these carbon-based molecules, we digest them and break them down. Some of the energy is stored in a usable form, like ATP, and some of it is just lost. When we look at photosynthesis, on the contrary, we take energy from the sun in order to build carbon-based molecules and string carbons together. So it's this energy investment from the sun that increases the level of free energy available to us in the form of carbon-based molecules that are manufactured by plants. So naturally, there are some equations to discuss these transformations in energy. I don't want you to freak out here, because this is the only one that we'll have all semester. It takes a little bit to get our head around. But if we understand that G is the energy that's available to do work, that is the same energy that was here, this usable energy in the blue. Now H is enthalpy, and enthalpy is the energy that's in a molecule's chemical bonds. So there's a few terms to get your mind around here: enthalpy and entropy. Entropy is that increasing level of disorder, whereas enthalpy is the energy that's available to do work that's stored in the molecule's chemical bonds. The energy that we're going to be able to release from that molecule and use. T is temperature. Now that's the absolute temperature in degrees Kelvin. And S is entropy, or the unavailable energy. So the three things you really need here: G is the energy available to do work, and it comes in two forms. H, the energy that's stored in a molecule's chemical bonds, and then some unavailable energy. So this really makes total sense, that when we consider the total energy available to do work, we can take a molecule and all the energy stored in those bonds and subtract the energy that is not available to do work, or entropy. So that brings us to the equation here. This triangle symbol is a delta. This means change in. So the change in free energy equals the change in the energy that's available in a chemical's bonds minus all the unavailable energy. So delta G then is the change in free energy. That's all we really need to know. Delta G is a change in free energy. If the equation blows your mind and you're not a math person, drop it. Know that delta G is the change in free energy. And a positive delta G means that the products, what we get after the reaction, have more free energy than the reactants, the molecules that went into the set of reactions. So the reactants have now formed products at a higher energy level. This is a positive delta G. There's a big change in energy. We've changed from one place, we've added energy, it's a positive delta G. And a positive delta G means there's more energy stored in the bonds of this molecule than there were in this molecule. And S, or entropy, is lower. Don't worry about that though. H is more important. These reactions are naturally not spontaneous, and thus they require the input of energy. Anything that requires the input of energy is endergonic. So another term for us to get straight. I'd recommend writing down all of these terms and some definitions for them so that you can get them straight in your head. But endergonic reactions require the input of energy in order to create products that have a higher energy state at the end of the reactions. Now, a negative delta G is the opposite of that. A negative delta G, we start with some reactants, and after the reactions happen, the products at the end have a lower energy. That means that there's less energy stored in the bonds of the product molecule, or H is lower, because H is the energy stored in the bonds of the molecule, and S is higher, or the energy that we've lost that we cannot use. Entropy is higher. These reactions are spontaneous. They may not be instantaneous, but they are spontaneous. That means that they occur without the input of energy, and thus they are exergonic. Exergonic reactions, we had higher free energy in the beginning, lower free energy after the reactions. They're exergonic. I think of this as exercise, okay? If we go for a run, we have lower energy after the run, and we have been exercising, so it's exergonic. We've lost some energy in the stored bonds. So that's all we really need to know. This equation may overwhelm you, it may make sense. It doesn't really matter. The really important part here is that delta G is something we understand, and delta G is the change in free energy. A positive delta G means that we had to put energy in, and we made the products have a higher energy level than the reactants. In a negative delta G, we have lost energy in the molecule, and thus the free energy change is negative, and these are exergonic reactions. So take a moment to diagram this for yourself. A positive delta G, use the figures on the right as a guide. Energy's got to be put in to have a positive delta G. We can't get more energy in a system unless we put it in, and thus it's endergonic and we're going to have a positive delta G. Take a moment, get this sorted in your head. It's very important for us to understand. So even if a reaction is a downhill reaction, that is exergonic, where the reactants have more energy than the products, where the delta G is negative, we still have to get over a hump in order for that reaction to start. Let's say we're thinking about the potential energy of a ball sitting up on top of a hill. In order for it to start rolling down the hill, it needs a little bit of a push or some activation energy. So activation energy is the energy that's required to destabilize the existing bonds and initiate a chemical reaction, much like pushing the ball from the top of the hill in order to allow it to roll down and release energy. An exergonic reaction's rate depends on the activation energy that's required. You can think of it in this way also. If you have a fireplace and you have logs in your fireplace and lots of kindling and some newspaper, it won't start all on its own. You have to activate it. Lighting the match and igniting it that first time is the activation energy necessary to make this reaction proceed in order to burn the logs. The rate can be increased in two different ways. We can increase the energy of reacting molecules by, say, heating the solution that they're in, and that will help them get over this activation energy hump. Or we can lower the activation energy. We can lower the activation energy from up here down to here by using catalysts. Catalysts are substances that influence the chemical bonds in a way that lowers the activation energy. Catalysts cannot violate the laws of thermodynamics, and they can't make an endergonic reaction be spontaneous or an uphill reaction be spontaneous, but they can help initiate an exergonic reaction. Catalysts don't alter the proportion of the reactant that's eventually going to be turned into product. So whether a catalyst was there or not, you would have the same amount of product as you would before. However, we're just pushing it along. So the catalyst is like the push that allows us to overcome the activation energy and roll the ball down the hill. In the case of our fire, the catalyst would be the match. The catalysts that we're going to see in the rest of this chapter are enzymes, so proteins that come along and make reactions proceed much more quickly. The final thing that we need to examine before we go on to look at reactions themselves is ATP. ATP is our universal fuel. It's somewhat like gas that we put in our cars. It's refined from other materials, but it's the universal fuel that all cells run on. It's the chief currency of all of our cells. ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and it's a nucleic acid. It's composed of a ribose, an adenine, and 3 phosphates. So as you remember from our macromolecules chapter, a nucleotide is composed of a ribose, 1 phosphate, and an adenine. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is basically the same structure except we have 2 additional phosphates. This is the key to energy storage. The bonds between these phosphates are very unstable. We can cleave one off and release energy that we can use to fuel all of the processes in our body. We might be able to cleave off a second phosphate in order to fuel our processes. We call these molecules correspondingly ADP, adenosine diphosphate, when there are only 2 phosphates, and AMP, adenosine monophosphate, when we have only 1 phosphate. So the more phosphates that are attached, the higher energy this molecule has. As we break off phosphates, we release energy that fuels the work that we do in our body. So then how do we use ATP? It's the hydrolysis of ATP, or breaking off of phosphate groups, that drives these endergonic reactions, or energy-consuming reactions, that we've been discussing. It's a coupled reaction, so it results in a net negative delta G, so it's exergonic and thus spontaneous. So here in this figure, we can see how this works. When we take ATP and add water in a hydrolysis reaction, we break the ATP into an ADP and an inorganic phosphates. The energy that's released by breaking ATP into ADP and an inorganic phosphate is used to fuel our cellular processes. ATP is not suitable for long-term energy storage. We use fats and carbohydrates for that, but then we'll metabolize the fats and carbohydrates when we need to in order to produce ATP to fuel all the reactions in our body. This is a lot of new material, but it's really important that we have an understanding of these energetics and how ATP works in order for us to proceed into the next two chapters, where we'll look at cellular respiration as well as photosynthesis. It's all about energy transfers, building molecules and breaking molecules down. So please spend the time that you need to become familiar with the material so far. So now that you've spent some time becoming familiar with the material, let's look at the card quiz. Oxidation is the blank and reduction is the blank. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy can be the energy in a system that's able to do work is a reaction with a positive delta G is spending ATP involves hydrolyzing it into ADP and inorganic phosphate. The energy released can drive other chemical reactions. This is true, or is it false? A catalyst speeds up a chemical reaction. How do they do this? Here are your answers. If you got them all, you're ready to move on. But if not, please take a moment and investigate what information is confusing to you. Please feel free to contact me, either via email or the phone, and we can get it straightened out. Don't let this stuff drive you crazy. It's tough, but not impossible.